Welcome again to English 5300. This is Andy Fleck. I'm going to run you through a very brief overview of how to write your first significant essay for our class together. So this essay, which is due on September the 27th, so everybody has to upload it by 11:59 p.m. on September the 27th, asks you to write a short essay about one small segment of Shakespeare's Henry V. The segment is up to you. You can pick any segment you want to, but basically what I'm asking you to do is to use a couple of other scholarly databases to try to enhance your interpretation of that scene. Now, what I'm asking you to do is to work on an early modern project, a little short essay on Shakespeare's Henry V. If I were a modern Americanist teaching this class or a medievalist teaching this class, I might ask you to try to produce this assignment around a different kind of text. Every one of the areas of English literature has its own specialized tools and resources, and we'll do our best to work together to learn about some of those tools. You should always feel free to ask your professors. So whoever's teaching you an 18th century class or whoever might be teaching you a 20th century novels class, you might ask them if there are specialized databases that you should know about. In the case of early modern British literature, there are a couple of databases that are really useful. And so I'm going to show you how to use those databases, or I'm going to ask you to use those databases to help you write a more complex essay about an early modern text. Okay, so you can read the basic description of the assignment here. You'll find it on Blackboard, the steps that I want you to follow. But basically, I just want to run you through how I did the example, which is described down here. So what I did was to go to Henry V, and in Act 1, Scene 1, there's a moment where the Archbishop, who's talking about the sort of transformation of the young Prince Hal into the remarkable King Henry, says that that Reformation came in a flood with such a heady current scouring faults, so that hydra-headed wilfulness so soon did lose his seat and all at once. And so that word scour struck me as peculiar. So what I decided to do was to use the OED. So over here on the library website, in Articles and Databases, I've clicked down on O for the Oxford English Dictionary. Scroll down to the OED, Oxford English Dictionary. Now this database, the Oxford English Dictionary, and again, I'm accessing this from campus right now, so it's going to go directly to that. If you're accessing it from off campus, you'll have to sign in, but this will take us to the Oxford English Dictionary. Now the thing about the Oxford English Dictionary is that it is a very complete historical dictionary, and so what it does is it gives you the historical usage of words. So if you go to the Merriam-Webster's and look up a word, it's not going to tell you how that word was used 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 500 years ago, something like that. But the OED has all that information in it. It is a really useful database and resource. So that word I'm going to look up is scour. Let me type in scour here. And it's going to take us to the verb to cleanse or polish. So I'm going to click on the full entry here. And it tells you that from 1366, so almost 700 years ago, it meant to cleanse or polish by hard rubbing with some detergent substance and so on. Now, I got interested in definition 2.2 here. So definition 2 is to remove grease or dirt from cloth, wool, etc. by some detergent process, and says that it could also be used in 2b figuratively, and that this was actually a usage right around the time of Shakespeare. So Francis Quarles who's a religious poet from this period, writes in a poem about Job that tears mingled with thy blood can scour so that scarlet sins shall turn as white as snow. And that strikes me as really close to the way that Shakespeare is using the word or thinking about, or that the archbishop, this religious figure in Shakespeare's Henry V, is using this figurative sense of scouring, right? The idea of scouring the soul or scouring the conscience of Henry V. So that's the first thing I did. I thought, okay, well, scour, that's an interesting idea. Now, what I say here is that I went back to Early English Books Online, which is another specialized database. Again, it's available to you as a student here at UTEP. It's a really expensive database that the general public would have a much harder time accessing, but which you, as a student at UTEP, can use for free, basically by virtue of being a student here. It's a really amazing resource for people who work on Renaissance or early modern literature. And again, there are similarly really fantastic and really amazing scholarly databases and resources in every field, in 19th century British literature, in 14th century British literature, in 20th century American literature, and so on. So you're going to want to ask your professors about those resources. And we'll try to see if we can discover some of them together over the course of our time together. But in any case, click on E, and it's going to take us to the list of databases starting with E. We're going to scroll down to Early English Books Online, EBO. We're going to click here. And again, since we're on campus, it's going to take us directly there. You'll have to sign in from off campus. So this is EBO. And so what I've suggested that you do is just do a basic keyword search. I'm going to click on search. I'm going to type in scour. And I'm going to limit it to 1590 to 1600. And just see what comes up. So it's thinking. So there are 90 records having to do in which the word scour is used in some way, right? So so an unknown author whose initials are A.T., who apparently was a doctor, published a book in 1596 called A Rich Storehouse or Treasury of the Diseased, and this has the word scour at least once, just once in this phrase. But I'm just going to scroll down here and see that George Abbot, who would eventually become the Archbishop of Canterbury, so it's just kind of a weird coincidence, but happens to use the word scour in an exposition upon the prophet Jonah contained in certain sermons. And so I thought, well, gosh, that sounds like the kind of thing I'm looking for. This text published in 1600, so almost exactly at the same time that Henry V was published, in fact, basically the same time as Henry V, is and on a kind of moral topic. So I'm just going to see what shows up here. So I'm going to click on View Hits with Section Headings. So one thing you have to be kind of careful of when you're using EBO is, so EBO is, well, you'll see in just a second, but it's a series of PDFs of, so it used to be microfilms, which have been transformed into electronic PDFs, of every page of every page of every book published in England or in English between 1470 and 1700. It's huge, and it's got every page of every book. So if the record that you come to is a very large book, it's possible that you could click on that record and you'll get a little warning saying this is an incredibly large document. So you may not want to click on the whole document. If you click on the subheadings, this View Hits with Subheadings section, then it breaks it down into even kind of smaller units, and those are a little bit easier to download, and they'll download faster and be more accessible. Anyway, so let's click on that. And I'm also, well, let me just show you what I did here. So in my little description of how I proceeded here, I mentioned that I just clicked on these two sections of this much larger book. And so here's the first one. So it's going to take me to a section of that book, and don't have to read the whole thing. Just to find where that word scour is, if I click over here on this little arrow, first hit, it's going to take me to the first place where the word scour showed up with this little kind of flower to help me find it. And so here's the context for this. Now he bringeth this fire of temptation to warm me and resolve me, but it is to good and not to evil. I doubt not, but I am his. I shall not perish finally. He slubbereth me to scour me, which means, he kind of makes me dirty in order to kind of clean me off. He rubbeth me to make me brighter. He wetteth me to make me sharper, right? These are kind of paradoxes about what you might, you make something dirty in order to use the dirt to get things clean, or you use something that looks like it ought to dull something in order to sharpen it, and so on. Anyway, so that's the one contextual hit. And if you go back over here, go back to the other section, you can do the same thing. It's going to take you to a different section of this very large book. The book is 638 pages long. That's really long, and I'm not asking you to read the whole thing. And then click on first hit, and it'll take you to another example of where the word scour shows up. So, and then as I say in my little description there, this idea of using this metaphor about scouring to talk about the idea of cleansing the prince's conscience and so on, putting a little bit of historical context and citing this book that's published in the same year as the play, I would make a little bit of an argument about how the Archbishop is talking about the scouring of Henry's conscience, and then use this material from Shakespeare's own period, his own time frame from 1600, to kind of contextualize this a little bit.